Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Susan Lerner. I'm the Director of Horticulture here at the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach. In 1994, the foundation created the first all-native botanical garden in Florida, just a block north of Worth Avenue. Pan's Garden, the name of the garden, has been promoting native plants and life-sustaining habitats for the past 26 years, and now the foundation's 18-acre Phipps Ocean Park project will continue that effort on a much, much larger scale. Both PANS and Phipps intend to inspire and educate and guide Palm Beach residents and visitors to also become part of the Homegrown National Park that you'll hear about by adding productive native plants to their landscapes. And just a housekeeping note, listening to Doug speak, I know you're going to have questions for him. Because there are so many people, 150 so far at this presentation, this is how we'll handle the questions. Please type them into the Q&A link, the bottom of your screen, all the way on the right, there's a Q&A link. Type them in during his talk so that we don't have a blocked up funnel at the end of his presentation. After the presentation, I have one important announcement to make, and then I'll relay as many questions as possible to Doug, and he's going to respond. We have some time set aside for that. So Doug's longtime friend, Susanna Durst, is a true trailblazer for the environment. She and I have been talking about bringing Doug Tallamy back to Palm Beach since this time last year. We had planned for him to be here in person, but we'll have to save that for another time. It is thanks to Susanna's generosity that Doug has spoken several times in Palm Beach and is with us here again today. Susanna?
Thank you, Susan. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us. I am Susanna Durst, as I was told. I have admired Doug Tallamy since I met him 20 years ago. We didn't quite see eye to eye right at that moment, but since then we have become friends. Doug Tallamy is an insect ecologist who has for the past 40 years been investigating ways to improve our relationship with the ecosystem that support us. This is the 5th time in the past 8 years that I've sponsored Doug Tallamy to speak in Palm Beach. And I'm pleased to say that we have seen gradual realization of the need to change our approach to the environment. I am very, very happy that the Preservation Foundation, and especially Susan Lerner, is understanding all of this and is working to make this all come true. So here we are. All we can say, please welcome Doug Tallamy, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Susanna. And it's not true. I loved you the minute I saw you the first time. Okay, I want to talk to you. It's a pleasure to visit Florida today, even though it only took me 5 minutes to get there. But I want to tell you what my idea of nature's best hope is. But before I do that, I want to return to what happened, not this past fall, but last year, a year ago fall, from, I don't know, Massachusetts all the way down to at least Georgia. There was what we call an oak mast. All the red oaks got together and produced their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looked like in a lot of places. Well, I'm easily entertained. So I took one of those acorns and I just stared at it. But I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. And it made a little hole, and it forced its head through, and then forced its body through that little hole. Kind of looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally plopped down onto the surface. Very dangerous time for this larva because it tastes really good. Lots of things want to eat it. So it's got to get to safety, and it does that by squirming. About 30 seconds, works its way down below the soil. And once it's underground, it stretches in all different directions and forms a little chamber. And then within that chamber, it converts itself to a pupa where it stays for 2 years.
Excuse me, Doug. It seems that people have a black screen. They're not seeing this. So I have to slow you down.
Well, what should we do? Stop sharing and try again?
Yeah, Katie, can you help with this?
Okay, I have stopped sharing. I don't know. Looks like it's working to me.
Okay, people can see it's working fine, gone again, good now. I don't know.
All right, we're
Okay.
talking about the acorn weevil. Stop me again if there's a problem. This is what an acorn weevil looks like. It looks like a weevil, and a lot of people think weevils have big noses, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule, and at the bottom of that extension is where the mouth parts are. They turn around and chew a hole down into the center of the acorn and then lay an egg in that hole, and that's how the larva gets to the center of the acorn. You might wonder why they spend 2 years underground instead of coming out the very next year. And the answer is it takes red oak acorns 18 months to complete their development. So if they came out the very next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns. Well, that leaves a hole in the acorn, and it's a true vacuum. You know, nature abhors a vacuum. So in this case, she has filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants. These are ants that live in the holes made by acorn weevils that have left their acorn. And if they find a brand new hole, brand new acorn, they want to move their colony from the old acorn, which is falling apart. So they get very excited. They tell everybody and start to carry the larvae and the eggs and the queen. And in about 30 minutes, they have moved into their new acorn. Then they post a guard here, make sure nobody else comes in, and then they'll live here for the next 2 years until this acorn falls apart. Well, about this time, my wife says, what is your point? What are you trying to tell us? I'm trying to tell you that that is just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions that occur in nature. They form most of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and acorns. Jays all over the world actually have a very mutualistic relationship with oaks. They are the primary disperser of oak acorns, and they can fly up to 2 miles from the original tree, and that's how oaks move around. You might wonder, if you live in an area that has witch hazel, you might wonder what pollinates witch hazel. I've wondered that for years. Everybody says it's flies or gnats, but if you go out and look at the flowers, there are never any flies or gnats on it. Well, it turns out I just learned this year that there are a group of moths called winter moths. The bicolored sallow is one of them that fly very late. I actually caught winter moths on Christmas Eve this year, and there was snow on the ground, but they fly late, and they're the primary pollinators of witch hazel. So whether these moths are flying late because witch hazel blooms late, or whether witch hazel is blooming late to get pollinated by winter moths, I don't know, but right now they're taking advantage of each other. You want to have breeding pileated woodpeckers unless you have lots of carpenter ants, and you're not going to have carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants, because that's what the only thing that they feed their young. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have Facilia, because that is the only pollen that bee can rear its young on. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We've got about 4,000 species of native bees, and over a third of them can only reproduce on the pollen of particular plants. So where I live, about 13 species of bees require the pollen of perennial sunflowers. You won't have Baltimore checker spot unless you have white turtle head, and so on. So nature really is a series of very specialized relationships. The problem today, though, is that these relationships, nature itself, is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we didn't take Teddy Roosevelt's advice very seriously. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon and he stood on the edge and looked out over its magnificence. And he said, leave it as it is. And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. The problem is, of course, that we don't have the option of leaving most of the country as it was at this point. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original ecological condition. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it for sure. We have drained it. We have grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in the US, which is 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we've paved it or otherwise developed it. We've straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We've polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We've drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents. Many of them are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we have changed the natural world, carved it up into little fragments of its former self. And each one of those fragments is too small and too isolated from other fragments to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. Why have we done this? Well, we thought the earth, our nest, was so big that we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, we were wrong about that. And that's why we're seeing headlines like this at a pretty regular clip. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. This one came afterwards. North America's lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of the North American bird population gone. As a matter of fact, the UN now predicts that we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. And I love the way they report this as if it's just another headline. They might as well say we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years. Losing 1 million species is simply not an option, folks. We have to make sure that doesn't happen. So I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment and thus upon all of our houses. But that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. And it's a cure that's going to take small efforts from lots of people, but they will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return to this headline briefly. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, the great E.O. Wilson from Harvard told us what it would mean if we were to lose our insects. And he did it way back in 1987 in this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. His message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, energy flow through our terrestrial habitats would be so drastically altered that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, they would all collapse and we would lose all those animals. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth would rot because we would lost insect decomposers that right now turn over nutrients very quickly, and all we would have are bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans would not survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself. But in order to do that, we're going to have to change the way we landscape. Why is that? Well, let me just remind you, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on natural ecosystems, what we call ecosystem services. Here are just a few things that plants deliver for us and everything else. It's not just for humans, like oxygen, pretty important. They also clean our waters, slow its journey to the sea where it's too salty to use. Carbon capture, enormously important today. It's plants pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, fixing it in their tissues, and then pumping the extra carbon into the ground. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have put there over the eons. They build topsoil, they hold it in place, they prevent floods, they dampen severe weather, and many other things. What do animals do for plants? Well, they provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds, and of course, other things. So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is simply not an option today. It never was a good option. But today with 7.8, 7.9 billion people on the planet, we need as many ecosystem services as absolutely possible. And this isn't going to do it for us. Now, there were visionaries through the ages who recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth. And Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. In the early part of the 1900s, he wrote extensively. One of the things he said was, the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, there have been indigenous groups that have been pretty good at doing that, but our huge Western societies and Asian societies have been terrible at doing that. We typically take far more than the earth has to offer in a particular place and spoil it. Then we go to another place, do the same thing. And that is not sustainable. So Aldo had a dream. He dreamt that we could actually develop what he called a land ethic. And he wrote about this in the Sand County Almanac. He recognized that we needed to use the earth. We needed to farm it and lumber it and graze and so on. But his dream was that we would learn to do that gently. We could do it without destroying local ecosystems. And that would be the land ethic that he dreamt about. What he never talked about, though, and I've always wondered why, is developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why he didn't talk about that, but I suspect that the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist at the same time in the same place was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, and it's still embedded in our own, that he may not have recognized it as an option. What I want to argue this afternoon, though, is that living with nature not only is an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. You know, in the past, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. What we have to do now is flip that on its head. We have to save nature or recreate it where there are a lot of people, because that's most places. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. So where should we start? Let's return to private property here. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. 70-some% of the entire country is privately owned. If we don't do conservation on private property, we're going to fail because we won't be using enough of the land properly. But you know, there are a lot of areas that we could do very effective conservation on that we typically don't think of as potential conservation areas. How about power and pipeline rights of ways? We've got 21 million acres in power and pipeline rights of ways. Railroad rights of ways, another 3 million acres. 17 million acres of roadsides. Golf courses, 2 million acres. Airports, 3 million acres. The Denver airport is twice the size of Manhattan. These are huge places. Then we have all the places we live, both in rural areas, suburbia, our cities, hundreds of millions of acres there. If you add up just those areas, and you can think of other places, that's 599 million acres where we could be doing a better job in conservation. How big is 599 million acres? Well, it's bigger than Vermont, plus New Jersey, plus Maine, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Florida, plus Oklahoma, Montana, California, even throw Texas in there. Not having a place to do conservation is not the issue. We have lots of places we can do it. Now, what we need to do is to rebuild nature in areas where we've dismantled it. We're not talking about conserving the nature that remains. We certainly have to do that, but I'm talking about really restoring what we've already destroyed. And in order to do that, we have to start with the species that other species depend on. Not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally. So we have to start with the most important species. So there are two groups. If we want to sustain the flowers, the plants that are the basis of every food web, then we need pollinators, we need bees. And if we want to take the energy that those plants create from the sun, they capture energy from the sun and turn it into food and then pass it to other organisms, then we need caterpillars. It's caterpillars that are creating the viable food webs that most animals depend on, because most animals don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants. And again, that's something is caterpillars. They're transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So imagine a landscape that doesn't have any caterpillars. Then the energy is locked up in the plants, and that's the end of it. Let's talk about chickadees, for example. They're found all over the country. You have Carolina chickadee in Florida. So do I right here. But other places have black-capped chickadees and mountain chickadees. They rear their young exclusively on insects, and if they're in a rich environment, they will rear them exclusively on caterpillars, even though they're eating seeds during the wintertime. Baby chickadees, baby birds in general, cannot eat seeds. So chickadees are not exceptions. 96% of our birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. We've actually got some data to support that statement. A recent graduate student, Ashley Kennedy, did a citizen science project where she put out a call for bird photographers all over the country to send her pictures of birds when they were bringing food to the nest. And they sent her thousands of pictures, and the pictures were good. So she got to identify what the birds were carrying in their beaks. And she was able to reconstruct the nestling diet of 20 of the common bird families that occur in North America. The green bars are the percentage of each one of those nestling diets that are caterpillars. And in 16 of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, imagine what would happen if we took caterpillars out of the system. Most of our terrestrial birds would not be able to breed successfully. So there's something special about caterpillars. Let's talk about what it is. Actually, there's several things special. One of them is that they are soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The wrapper is exoskeleton, it's cuticle, it's undigestible, so birds don't want a lot of that. And because the caterpillar is soft, you can stuff it down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring it. And if you've ever watched a parent bird rear its young, they're pretty rough. Their beak's like a plunger, they just stuff it down there. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. And some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They're nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, very low percentage of chitin compared to most other insects, particularly beetles, which are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. Most of the beetle is undigestible, and they have a lot of sharp edges too. And it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate and you're a vertebrate and birds are vertebrates, and vertebrates cannot make their own carotenoids. You have to get them from plants. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential parts of our diets. And that's why my wife Cindy makes sure I have lots of carrots so I can get my beta carotene, and lots of tomatoes so I can get my lycopene, and whatever that is so I can get my lutein. And because she feeds me well, all those carotenoids stimulate my immune system. And I can't think of a better time to have a very healthy immune system. Carotenoids are antioxidants. They run around our body, protect our proteins from DNA damage, and DNA from oxidative damage, very important. They improve color vision. When your mother said, eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. They improve sperm vitality, improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about things like this prothonotary warbler, who is bright yellow. He's a male because he's had access to lots of luteins. And he takes those luteins and makes pigments out of them, puts them in his feathers. And the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. Well, where are they getting their carotenoids from? They're getting them from the prey items that they eat. But look, carotenoids are not equally distributed among bird prey items. These first two bars are types of caterpillars, far more carotenoids in caterpillars than anything else. Third bar is orthopterids, things like crickets and grasshoppers and katydids. Here are the adult caterpillars down here, the moths and butterflies themselves. Fewer carotenoids again, because they're not eating green leaves. It's the caterpillars that are eating green leaves. And here's the earthworm way over here. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. Does this influence prey choice when birds are feeding their young? Well, Ashley did another study where she put GoPro cameras on the rooftops of bluebird houses. And those GoPro cameras took a picture once every second. The idea was to capture the bluebirds as they were flying into the box with a prey item, get a good picture of it, and then we could see exactly what they were bringing in. Well, she had a lot of GoPro cameras and a lot of bluebird boxes, and she did it for 3 years. So she got over 7,628 observations that were good enough to use. Actually, she had to go through more than 1 million pictures to come up with that. Got a very nice relationship, though. What was brought back most often were those caterpillars, and they have the highest level of carotenoids, followed by those orthopterids, and then everybody else is nestled down here. So it really does suggest that carotenoids are important parts of bird diets, and that they are getting their carotenoids from caterpillars. And that makes caterpillars essential parts of bird diets. They're not optional. So let's just say birds need caterpillars. How many do they need? Well, that's a good question. Is 1 or 2 enough? Let's return to chickadees. We got a lot of data on chickadees, and it turns out that in order to make a single nest of chickadees, it takes thousands, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars just to get them to the point where they leave the nest. So 1 or 2 caterpillars is not enough. And after they leave the nest, by the way, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days, but they're flying all around, so nobody's counted that. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, and you do because there's nothing else left in most places, you have to have all those caterpillars in your yard. Chickadees are only foraging about 50 meters from the nest. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we landscape in a way that does not include all those insects in our yards, that's called insect decline. And it really is looking like that is one of the factors that's causing bird declines. We went to the study that from Rosenberg et al. That said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years, and we divided those birds into 2 groups: the birds that require insects at some part of their life history, and the birds that do not require insects, the finches and the doves. They actually gained some numbers during the last 50 years, but the birds that require insects lost on average 10 million individuals per species. So this doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly does suggest there's a very tight relationship. So at this point, let's just say if we want birds around and all the other things that eat insects and caterpillars, we're going to have to start landscaping in a way that supports those insects. That's a very different goal from the way we've landscaped in the past. In the past, it's been we don't want any insects around, but that is creating dead landscapes. So how do we add caterpillars to our landscapes? Well, we do that by adding the plants that make them. That seems pretty easy, but there is a catch, and that is most plants don't support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to choose the ones that do. And nothing illustrates it better than the monarch butterfly, although it's very typical of most of the caterpillars that are out there. It's very fussy about what it can eat. You can have all the crepe myrtle and boxwood and figs from India and all of the other exotic plants that we landscape with, and it won't support a single monarch because the only thing they can develop on is milkweeds. And it turns out it's called host plant specialization. Most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Why? Because plants have made them that way. Plants don't want to be eaten. Plants want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there in the summertime. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. If you don't believe me, go outside and eat a plant. See if you like it. You're not going to like it. There's a reason it's hard to get our kids to eat their vegetables. They inherently know that they're toxic. That's my little joke. This is not a joke. We do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants can only eat the plants for which they have particular adaptations that allow them to get around, circumvent those plant defenses. They develop the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, the behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize their exposure to those compounds. But each group of plants are making different types of defenses, and a single insect cannot adapt to all of them. So they pick one or two types of plants and they get good at getting around those. That's what the specialization is all about. And that's why when we bring plants in from other continents, our insects can't eat them. Those plants haven't been here long enough for our insects to specialize on them. All I'm trying to say here is that plant choice matters. If we're trying to rebuild functional ecosystems, if we're trying to create food webs right where we live, we're going to have to choose the plants that do that because all plants don't. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well that works if you choose the right plants. And I'm going to start with our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. Cindy and I live on a farm that was broken up 10 acres. I'm sitting in this little room right there. This is what it looked like when we moved in. The farm had been exhausted. It was farmed for over 300 years. And the last thing they did was to mow it for hay. But in our area, there's so many invasive plants from Asia that you're really just mowing multiflora rose and oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and autumn olive and so on. And then you call that hay. So when we built the house, of course, the mowing stopped and all of the rootstocks that had not been mowed came back. This is what our property looked like. It was just a tangle of Asian vines and alien plants. That's Cindy getting ready to remove all of these things. So if you have an invasive plant problem on your property, don't despair. It is possible to get rid of it. It is a lot of work, but if little Cindy can do it on 10 acres, you can do it as well. What was I doing while she was working hard? Well, I was telling her she was doing a great job, but I was also putting the plants back, and I did it selfishly. I started with the plants that I hoped would attract the caterpillars that I like to take pictures of, things I'd never seen before, like the Canadian owlet. If I wanted Canadian owlet, that's what the adult looks like, just like a leaf. I needed to have meadow rue. Well, we didn't have any meadow rue on our property. There's no meadow rue around us. The whole area had been farmed to death. So I got some meadow rue seeds from someplace else and I planted them. This was an experiment. I didn't know if the Canadian owlet would ever find my meadow rue and how long it might take. So I planted the seeds, but I didn't go out and check them for about a month and a half. And finally I walked by just by accident and the plants were practically defoliated. The Canadian owlets had come right away. So now we have a good population of meadow rue and Canadian owlets. So we've added 2 species to the property. That worked really well. Here's another one that worked, the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer. This beautiful moth has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on this plant. Biden's aristosa, ditch daisy. I did know where there was some ditch daisy about 14 miles away in a power line cut. So I got the seeds, planted them at home. They grew really well. It took about a year for the goldenrod stowaway to find this plant, but it did. And now I've got a good population of both. So now we've added 4 species to the property. I wanted the hackberry emperor because it's a butterfly that ought to be here. but as its name implies, it's a specialist on hackberry, and we didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry. It took about 4 years for the butterfly to find our hackberry, but now we got a good population of both. I went out in June of this year and walked by one of my hackberry trees. There were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on a single branch. So there we go, we've added 6 species. Well, I didn't plant goldenrod, came in on its own, but along with it came many of the things that specialized on goldenrod, like the brown-hooded owlet, the Arcigera flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. This is what I'm waiting for, the goldenrod flower moth. For some reason, it has not found our goldenrod yet. This is what the larvae look like. So this is anticipation. This is like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. One of these days, I'm going to go out and look in the fall, and I will find the goldenrod flower moth, and that will be a great day. Planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper, it's beautiful in the fall. It can climb our trees without pulling them down. It's a very good native, and it supports lots of beautiful sphinx moths, like the Pandora sphinx, and that's its beautiful adult. The lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx all came when I planted my Virginia creeper. Wanted the zebra swallowtail. I was stretching it here because we're north of where it actually occurs. The closest population is about 26 miles south of us. Well, zebra swallowtail is a specialist on pawpaw. So we planted pawpaw and we waited 9 years before the zebra swallowtail found it, but they finally did. In the meantime, we got the pawpaw sphinx. I didn't even know there was a pawpaw sphinx, and lots of pawpaws. One of the double-tooth prominent because it's just a very cool looking caterpillar, but it's a specialist on elm. So I planted American elm. That came right away. Evening primrose moth, because it's beautiful. I like beauty like everybody else. So we needed evening primrose, planted it, then it comes and spends its day with its head stuck in the flowers. It's very cute. And we planted lots of oak trees. Now, those are just examples of what we planted at our house, but I want to focus on oaks for a while because they're such an important tree. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. Many of you have probably seen it. People argue about whether it is 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And a lot of people think that your oak has to be enormous before it can contribute meaningfully to your property, but not so. I hear people say, I'm not going to plant an oak. I won't live long enough to enjoy it. Well, if you live till the next year, you can start enjoying it because they start contributing right away. And I can say that with confidence because I planted my oaks as acorns or 2-foot bare root whips. And right away, they started to bring the caterpillars and the moths to our property that support the food webs. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, the orange-headed epicalema, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the delightful dagger moth, the pleasant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bugulatrix, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red line panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths have come to our property because we have what they eat, oaks. And they come right away. This is a pin oak that has just poked its head above the leaves, and here's a crocus geometer standing on the ground eating its leaves. So you don't have to wait centuries before your oak starts to contribute. This is a picture of our house from the same perspective I took that first picture. I'm still sitting in this window up here. We've got a little lawn here. We're very traditional, but it's just to illustrate we have put plants back. Not all of them. I keep adding things. And every time I add a different plant lineage to our house, new species of insects come. So I made it a goal about 4 years ago to take a picture of every species of moth I could find on our properties. Haven't gotten to the butterflies yet, but I am up to 1,030 species of moths that I have photographed on our property, and I keep finding them. So who knows how many there really are. Now we've got 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the land area, we have 38% of all the moths that occur in all of Pennsylvania. And because each one of those is a type of bird food, we've recorded 59 species of terrestrial birds that have bred on our 10 acres, which is 40% of all of the terrestrial birds that breed in Pennsylvania, just on 10 acres. We saw this headline a few months ago. The World Wildlife Fund says that Earth has lost 2/3 of its wildlife since 1970. But I'm thinking, not at our house. I am convinced we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3 at our house, and it didn't take that long. So I offer this as encouragement. We can turn it around. These are terrible headlines, but we don't have to give up. All we have to do is change the plants on our properties. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres, and if you don't have 10 acres, it's not going to work. Well, that's a good question. Can it work in suburbia? Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. And they are surrounded. They're in a typical development surrounded by neighbors with the big lawns, and they only have 0.6 acres. So 18 times less property than Cindy and I have. The major invasive species in Kirkwood, Missouri is bush honeysuckle. So the first thing they did was get rid of their bush honeysuckle. Then they planted a lot of native plants, and they put in a water feature called a bubbler. And then they sat back and started to count the birds that use their property. And they're up to 149 species of birds, 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. And that's on 0.6 acres. So yes, it works on smaller properties. Can it work in urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, because right over that wall is one of the runways for O'Hare Airport. Right over here is Kennedy Expressway. And she only has 1/10 of an acre. That is 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. Well, she did the same thing. She got rid of the invasive species on her property, put in 60 species of native plants, a water feature for the birds, and then she started to count her birds, and she's up to, oh, I got to change that, 117 species of birds. A great horned owl came the other day, and including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. If you haven't seen a woodcock lately, you can go to Pam's house in Chicago and check it out. What about city centers, though? 82% of us live in cities. Well, in 2014, I was looking at this plant, Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly weed. People call it butterfly weed, but that reminds me, we have a serious marketing issue with our native plants. We call them weeds and wonder why people don't plant them. So let's not call this butterfly weeds. Let's call it Monarch's Delight. 2014, I'm staring at Monarch's Delight here. And the first thing I saw were 2 species of leafcutter bees, megachilid bees. I know they're megachilid bees because they collect their pollen on their tummies and not on their legs. Well, megachilids have very particular requirements. Not only do they need pollen and nectar, but they also require soft leaves, things like redbud leaves, because they cut the edges of those leaves out and leave those little circles there. Then they roll them up and pack them full of pollen, and that's where they lay their eggs. And then they stuff this whole thing into a crack or a crevice. So this is 3 different reproductive events here, 3 eggs, 3 larvae developing. Well, there was a redbud leaf growing right next, or redbud plant growing right next to the Monarch's Delight. And that's why there were leafcutter bees there, but there were also bumblebees there. And I think the redbud had a lot to do with that, because remember, bumblebees overwinter as queens, and only as queens. There are no workers around. So in the spring, the queens have to do all the work themselves. So they need a lot of very early season forage. And that's exactly what redbud provides. And if there's enough of it, then the queen can get enough food to create her workers, and then the whole thing will run itself. So there were bumblebees there. So I guess the redbud was good enough. And then I saw a monarch. Now remember, this is 2014. Actually, I saw 2 monarchs on the Monarch's Delight. I had gone all of 2013 without seeing a single monarch. That was the low point of the eastern monarch population. Only 3.6% of the population left compared to 1976. So this was, and this was June. It's unusual to see monarchs up far north in June. So I was very encouraged that maybe the monarchs were going to be able to come back. Why were they there? Because there was Monarch's Delight, and there was another species of milkweed. I think this is purple milkweed. So they had forage, but they also had their host plant. They could reproduce. Do you know where I was? I was on the High Line in the middle of Manhattan. Middle of Manhattan, 30 feet above the taxis, middle of construction. The High Line, if you're not familiar with it, is an elevated railroad that was abandoned. Somebody went up there, and there were a whole bunch of native plants that had seeded in themselves. So they decided to make it a tourist destination, and they sunk a lot of money into it. But this is the extent of the High Line's plantings. It's a strip of planting along the length of this railroad. It's about a mile at this point. This is Rick Dark. He was always after me to come see the beautiful plantings on the High Line. I'm not much of a city boy, so I always drag my feet, but Finally, he got me there. I thought I'd see a lot of plants, but nothing using them because, how are they going to get there to the middle of Manhattan? But I was completely wrong. Somebody just finished a study of the bees on the High Line. There are over 30 species there at this point. So it convinced me that if thoughtful native plantings can bring life back to the middle of Manhattan, we can do the same anywhere. But there are 4 things we need to think about if we're going to be successful. And the first one is we've got to shrink the area that's in lawn, because we've got a lot of lawn. We've got more than 40 million acres of lawn nationwide. That is the size of New England that is in a deadscape like this. And I know why we do that. It's a convenient way to fill in a lot of blank spaces, but it's a status symbol. We are judged by how perfect our lawn is. But if we can cut the area of lawn in half and still have our status symbol. The area we leave will be manicured. We can still be good citizens, but we're going to put a lot of plants back into this area. And if we do that in half the area that's now in lawn, that'll give us 20 million acres to work with. And if we do that at home, we can create a new national park that we call Homegrown National Park. And it'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. We'll have the largest park in the country. Many benefits from bringing at least parts of nature right to where you live at home. It allows you to develop either for the first time or renew a personal relationship with the natural world. And you could do it at your own time, your own pace, simply going out your door. You don't have to fight the crowds of national parks. If you go to a real national park, millions of people there. It's free. Nobody's going to charge you. It's never closed, no matter what pandemic comes down the road. No travel hassles. And again, you get to experience the natural world alone, which I think is essential to developing that relationship. And this is particularly important for our kids. Our kids suffering from what Richard Louv calls nature deficit disorder. They have no experience with the natural world. So what do? We get 30 kids, put them on a bus with a teacher, and they drive for an hour and go to some natural place and walk around for an hour. And the teacher tells them not to touch anything. And they get back in the bus, and that's the end of that. So I'm sure that's better than nothing. But what they've really experienced is walking around with 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. If they have some part of nature at home, they can go outside alone, no parental supervision, let them risk it and get to know the natural world. Maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards. And I'm learning that from my own granddaughter. This is Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very small patch of nature, and it's not so natural. It's a little piece of lawn and a hedge, but there are anoles lizards there. So she sent me this picture to tell me how to hunt lizards. You get on the ground and you cover yourself with leaves and sticks so that the lizards can't see you coming. And then you crawl very slowly towards the lizard. No smiling. This is serious business here. You can wear your best dress, that's okay. But you sneak up on the lizard, you catch him, and you put him in an aquarium, and now you've got a personal relationship with that part of the natural world. This is important for not just Zoe, but for all the kids, because they're the future stewards of the planet. If she doesn't care about the lizards around her or the other parts of nature, she's going to be a lousy steward. Now, I don't think she's going to be crawling on the ground the rest of her life looking for lizards, but I guarantee she will remember hunting lizards in Hawaii. If you want to do more than hunt lizards, get this book by Nancy Stranisti, Nature Play at Home. Dozens of great ideas of how to expose kids to the natural world. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, we now have a new website, homegrownnationalpark.org. You can actually put in your data of where you live and the area that you have planted in natives or plan to plant or are preserving, and get yourself on the map. The idea is to watch this map light up as we connect all the isolated habitat fragments that are out there by converting the areas where we live and work and play. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. What are we going to put in the area that we take out of lawn? Part of what we put in there has got to be what I call keystone plants. One of the most important things we've learned in our lab recently is that just 5% of our native plants are making about 75% of the caterpillar food that drives these food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food, which means about 85% of our native plants, they're nice, they're good, but they're not contributing all that much. So what we need to do when we're reconstructing our food web, it's like building a house. You got to start with the 2x4s. You don't start with the wallpaper. The 2x4s are those keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is. Picture a Roman arch. The keystone is that stone right in the middle of the arch. And if you take the stone out, the arch falls down. If you take keystone plants out of the food web collapses. So the question is no longer simply, are natives better than non-natives? On average, they certainly are. It's really, do we want those critically important productive plants in our landscape or not? And if our choice is with ecologically destructive plants, all those invasive species that have escaped our plantings and now are biologically polluting our natural areas, then the choice ought to be obvious. I get an email once or twice a year from somebody saying, don't you know that ginkgo biloba from Asia actually grew in North America 7 million years ago? And that makes them native. That means we can plant them and everything will be great. Well, yes, I do know that the ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native today, but I'm not going to bother because this isn't our metric anymore. Our metric is productivity. I don't care if ginkgos grew on the moon 7 million years ago. They produce 0 species of caterpillars. So they're there, they're occupying space, they look nice, but they're not part of the local food web. And if our goal is to restore the life around us, we got to put those plants that are. What is the best plant you can put in your yard in 84% of the counties in North America? It's one of the oaks. Oaks support 900 species of caterpillars nationwide, 557 species in the mid-Atlantic states. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that in terms of productivity. Here's an example of what keystone oaks are doing in our yard. Now remember, I've taken pictures of 1,030 moss species so far. Out of that 1,030, 906 have known host plants. So there's still more than 100 we don't know what they're eating. But out of the 906 that have known host plants, 267 species use oaks. We've got 69 genera of native plants, woody plants on our property. And only one of them is the oaks, Quercus. And we've got hundreds of genera of herbaceous plants. So oaks represent less than 1.5% of our woody plant diversity and way less than 1% of our total plant diversity, but they're supporting almost 30% of our moss species diversity. That's the power of a keystone plant. Imagine what would happen to the diversity of our yard if we took oaks away. How do you know what your keystone plants are? You go to Native Plant Finder on the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code, and the come back here. The ranked list of both woody and herbaceous plants will pop up for your county. And this works really well in most parts of the country. California, not so well because they've got giant counties and lots of biomes. So they've got something called CalScape in case you happen to live in California. But notice I say under the woodies here, native oaks, native willows, native elms, native maples. If you go to the nursery and you say, let's say you say, I want a maple, they'll probably sell you a Japanese maple. Or if I want a cherry, they'll sell you an Asian cherry. If I want an oak, they might sell you a Chinese oak or an English oak. You've got to specify that you want a native, because if you don't specify, you end up with a non-native member. Even though it's a native genus, it's going to reduce insect use of that plant by 65%. So get the natives, they're the important ones. These are some of the top ranked plants in southern Florida. Goldenrod is often a top ranked plant in the herbaceous category, followed by asters and sunflowers. These three genera alone are supporting at least 50 species of native bees that specialize on them. So if you don't have them in your yard, you've lost the opportunity of supporting 50 species of native bees. The lists are much longer than this, by the way. I just stopped because I run out of room. Okay, we're going to cut the lawn in half. We're going to put in keystone plants, attract all these insects to our yard, and then kill them with our security light. And of course, that is not the goal. It turns out that light pollution is one of the major causes of insect declines, at least in the temperate zone worldwide. A lot of this research is coming from Europe, but if you're focusing on moths, for example, there are many ways that lights kill moths. By exhaustion, the moths fly around and around and around the light until they drop from exhaustion, or they collide with it and get killed. They get incinerated. They die from dehydration. The bat comes and eats them. Bright lights blind a lot of night insects. Who knew? And it keeps them from doing what they ought to be doing by, foraging and mating and reproducing. This is really good news to me, believe it or not, because out of all the major causes of insect declines, this is going to be the easiest one to fix. Just turn out your lights. That's a flick of a switch. I know what you're going to say. I can't turn out my light because the bad man will come. Okay, put a motion sensor on your security light so it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to find out is the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white light out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb. Yellow bulbs, yellow LED bulbs in particular, are the least attractive to nocturnal insects. If we all switched out our security lights for yellow lights, we could save billions of insects in the summertime, and probably billions of dollars as well, because they're a lot more energy efficient. So we're going to reduce the lawn, put in the Keystone plants, bring all these insects to our yards. We're going to turn out our lights, and then we're going to invite Mosquito Joe to come and spray and kill everything. That's what spraying does, folks. When you spray the fig hedges all in Palm Beach, it kills everything. Even though Mosquito Joe will tell you, well, this is a natural product, so it's okay. It is a natural product. It's a pyrethroids, but cyanide is a natural product too, but it doesn't mean it's not lethal. And he might say, well, it only kills mosquitoes. Not so. Kills all the insects that it attracts. I understand mosquitoes are annoying, but the way to control mosquitoes is in the larval stage. It's not in the adult stage. And this is a way that attacks only mosquitoes. You get a bucket, you fill it full of water, put in some straw or hay, and let it ferment for a couple days. It becomes an irresistible place for mosquitoes to lay their eggs. Then you take a mosquito dunk, you get at the hardware store. This is Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a natural disease of aquatic Diptera. You put it in the bucket, the larvae feed on it, and it kills them. And because it's targeted in your bucket here, it's not killing a bunch of other aquatic things, and it's not killing any of the insects on your vegetation. This is the way we should all control our mosquitoes. Okay, fourth thing we need to do is landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the Polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillars eat the leaves, then they spin a cocoon and hang from a branch, and then they emerge as an adult, and then they do it all again. So it all happens on the tree. I wish that everything did that, but most species don't. 480 of those species, 94%, drop from the tree, wiggle their way underground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree and complete their development there. The problem is there is no leaf litter under the tree, and we compact our soil and we mow it and make it no man's land for caterpillars. So this becomes a deadly landscape. If the caterpillar's in the tree, it drops from the ground here and it dies. And the next generation will be smaller, and the generation after that disappears altogether. I'm convinced that the way we neaten up our landscapes is one of the major reasons that we have insect declines everywhere. And of course, the cement landscape is even less inviting. I'm not trying to discourage the use of trees in cities. I'm trying to discourage the profligate use of cement everywhere as a default landscaping. That's just laziness. And we know that it destroys our watersheds. This is what most people do. You have a tree and you put it in a big yard. Nobody's measured how well caterpillars do in a situation like this, but I guarantee they do better in a situation like this, where you have a tree and then a layered landscape, maybe a dogwood here and a native azalea and ferns and ground cover. The caterpillars drop down into a safe site. Nobody's going to step on them. Nobody's going to mow them. The soil is all loose, so they can get underneath, and they can pupate in the leaf litter. Or this is where you can do your spring ephemeral gardening. Not only is this beautiful and fun, but it's a safe site for those caterpillars, and it's a great mechanism for shrinking the lawn. You put beds around your trees, so you don't have to mow right up to them. Good place to use your ground covers like wild ginger or foam flower or May apples or ferns. I mean, this is at a hotel, but still it's a safe site for those caterpillars. Another grad student, Desiree Narango, has shown, her research has shown that there actually is room for compromise in our plant choice. And this is good news to me. Desiree did a giant project in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., looking at how well chickadee populations can be sustained in landscapes that are dominated by native plant versus landscapes dominated by introduced plants. So this is suburbia. This is inside the Beltway. Well, when they're dominated by introduced plants, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, you reduce the amount of chickadee food by 75%. They were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. There's a nest box up in each home where she did these studies, but the chickadees came, they looked around and said, there's not enough to eat here. We're not even going to try. If they did try, those nests contained 1.5 fewer eggs. They were 29% less likely to survive. They produced 1.2 fewer fledglings if they did survive, and it took them 1.5 days longer to do that. That's what happens when you take the food away. And if you put all that together into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of woody non-native plants in your landscape, this is from nothing to 100%. This is what you get. This dotted line is the replacement rate. That's the rate at which the population has to reproduce in order to replace the adults that die every year. If you make babies at that rate, it's sustainable. The population's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. If you make babies at this rate down here, more than replacement, more babies than adults die, you've got a growing population. But if you make fewer babies than adults that die every year, you've got a shrinking population, which of course is unsustainable. Right here is where those lines overlap, which suggests that you can have up to 30% of your woody plant biomass non-native, as long as it's not invasive plants, and still have a sustainable breeding population of in this case, chickadees, but it's going to work for any bird. In other words, if 70% of your woody plant biomass is native, it's going to be okay. And what I like about this, not only is this the first time this has been measured for any bird anywhere, so if you're wondering whether your plant choice really does impact the things around you, this study ought to convince you that it does. But this is the zone of compromise here. You can have your ginkgo, you can have your crepe myrtle, your favorite non-native plant, without destroying the local food web, as long as it doesn't dominate the biomass in your yard. And that's good news to me, because if my message was you can't have any non-native plants, very few people would be listening, because we love our non-native plants. It is not the presence of non-native plants that destroys food webs. It is the absence of native plants. Can we use native plants in formal designs? I get this picture from North Carolina. People are sending me, what they're doing is replacing the plants in this very formal garden with native plants. Here's Joe Pye right here. Notice I didn't say Joe Pye weed. It's not a weed. And when they finish, they're going to send me a picture to show that, yeah, you can make a formal garden with native plants. Remember, formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe all the time. And I guess that's okay, because there are non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into this typical suburban lot here without offending anybody? Of course we can. Put a little fence around it. That show this is intentional. It's not a bunch of weeds. It's beautiful flowering plants, a number of species satisfying the needs of a number of species of native bees. It's not very big, but if everybody did it, there'd be a lot of forage around. You know, people say, we want to save the pollinators, but people think that if you don't live next to agriculture where we need pollinators, then you don't have to do it. But pollinators is more than agriculture, folks. 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants require pollinators. So if we don't have pollinators everywhere, we're going to lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. And that is not an option. So we need pollinators every place we want plants, which is every place. This one's bigger. This is a Drew Latham design, about 3 times the size of the other one. It's beautiful. Imagine the amount of life that is here versus the amount of life that is here. So we can do it. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Of course they can, and more of them are doing it. Minnesota has a cost-sharing program that encourages homeowners to convert part or all of their lawn to Minnesota prairie plants, and they help you pay to do that. It's a very successful program. There's an island in Florida, maybe you know about it, where they're paying residents to allow burrowing owls, listed species, to burrow in the front yard. This is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species on your property, we're going to pay you to take care of it rather than fine you in case you do something to it. Missouri and Fayetteville, Arkansas have a bounty on calorie pairs. It's one of the most invasive ornamental plants that we have. If you document that you've taken down a calorie pair in your property, you get a free tree replacement. And even public utilities are getting in the act here. The San Antonio Water System's giving people $100 coupons to replace water thirsty non-native plants with water efficient native plants. Buffalo, New York is giving people $100 coupons to simply plant natives. And then of course we have all of the grass replacement programs in the far west, particularly California, where you get rebates for converting every $2 for every square foot of lawn you take out and put in the xeric plantings. I think we made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. The first one is we've assumed that nature's important, but not essential, which means when push comes to shove, nature always loses. We love it, but you know, if resources are short supply, nature loses out. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo before the virus broke out, and there was this wall-sized poster which epitomizes what our society thinks of conservation, and that includes our top conservation biologists. We're going to save wildlife so the future generations can enjoy it. That was Teddy Roosevelt's motivation. We're going to create national parks so that future generations can enjoy them. And I understand that, and that's neat, but nature is not just there for entertainment. We need to save the natural world so that we have future generations. It's a little bit more urgent. Second misstep is that we've assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now we talked about this, but by restricting conservation just to the areas where we don't have a lot of humans, it's dooming those efforts to failure because that is not enough area. David Quammen has a perfect analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. This is a functional Persian rug. That is not 79 Persian rugs. It's 79 rug fragments. None of them are functioning as a Persian rug. And this, of course, is what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. And I hate that language because it suggests they're places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards. So what we need to do is put the plants back. We need to glue our rug back together again. We need to fill in these white spaces, these no man's land, with those powerful plants. We can diversify with lots of other plants, but we need to create viable habitat, not just to connect them with biological corridors so that plants and animals can move back and forth, but so they can live here, right there with us. We're going to start to share our spaces with the natural world. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists. We didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of every human being on the planet. And I have no idea why, because every person on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystems. So why wouldn't we all share the responsibility of good Earth stewardship? Stan Rushworth, the Cherokee elder, once said, the Western settler mindset was, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You're not born with these mindsets, you're taught them. And we're great at teaching this one. We've been terrible at teaching everybody what their obligation to our nest, planet Earth, really is. It doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but we really can save it where we live. And this approach empowers each one of us. You know, these days it's so easy to feel absolutely powerless, like there's nothing a single person can do. But in this case, the cliche is correct. You can go outside, you can plant one of those powerhouse plants, you can shrink your lawn, you can get rid of your invasive species, you can put in a pollinator garden. You can do all of those things as a single person and make a real difference that is measurable right where you live. That makes you, every single individual, an important cog in the future wheel of conservation. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable. Don't worry about the entire planet's problem. You'll go crazy if you do that. Just worry about the piece of the planet that you can influence. If you own property, that's obvious. That's where you're going to start. If you don't own property, volunteer. Help somebody who does. Help a local land conservancy or a park. They're all underfunded and understaffed. So as property owners or volunteers, each one of us has the power. We certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to determine nature's fate and ultimately our fate as well. So I've convinced my grandchildren that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much.
Wow. Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
Let me see if I can see myself again.
Here, I'll stop sharing.
Okay,
There you go.
okay, great. So that was really, you are the master of landscape stewardship, you are, and thank you for reminding us we all have a part to play. I mean, that is what this is all about. So, so if you've come this far, all the rest of you in this presentation, and if you have or already have or you're going to add productive native plants to your landscape wherever you are, I mean, we're here from Oregon and Florida, we're pretty much, across the country. We really do applaud you. As an added bonus, some of you might know already, as an added bonus, for those of you who can visit Palm Beach's Classic Bookshop, we, thanks to Susanna, have a gift for you. You may pick up a free copy of Nature's Best Hope within the month by February 26th. Unfortunately, we aren't shipping any books, so you got to be here to grab the goods. And I hope many of you will take advantage of that. Okay, so some of the questions, let's see. Oops, new questions came in. So let me start at the top here. I don't have everybody's name, but we've got a little time. So, you might have touched on it, Doug, you probably did, but I've been managing questions a lot here. How can we encourage our neighbors? What can we do to encourage our neighbors to do the right thing, to be a landscape steward? Any tricks to pass on? Besides sharing this video?
That is one of the toughest challenges. It is if you walk across the street and tell your neighbor that he's not living right, he's got to live like you do, and that's just a tough sell. So
Right.
I think the best way is to be a good example. Create a landscape that your neighbor might actually find attractive and inviting. I get lots of emails from people, particularly ladies, who say they're the butterfly lady on the street, and all the kids come down to their property to see the butterflies, and the whole neighborhood loves it. So we need positive examples like that. But it is the biggest challenge we're talking about changing the culture, and the culture's been around a long time. Changing culture takes a long time. It's why I write the books, so that you can get the lengthy explanations for why this is important. But you're not going to change somebody's mind with a soundbite. I use birds as a hook. There are a lot of people who don't know anything about landscaping, but they love the birds. So they put out a bird feeder and they think that's enough. So maybe you can approach it that way and say, well, your plants are the bird feeders when they're reproducing. They're not eating seeds, and that can convert a lot of people. So, but it's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Yep. So here's another question. What does adding honeybee hives do to our properties? What's the impact of that? I know it's a question.
So if you live near agriculture, that often can help the farmer, because honeybees are great pollinators for a lot of our agricultural products. But there's growing evidence that honeybee hives in our suburban landscapes, when we're trying to promote the conservation of the 4,000 species of native bees, seriously compete with those native bees. Honeybees are there first. The hives are huge, and they get the nectar, and it's simply less forage for those native bees. That's a problem because we have so little forage to begin with. If we had really well planted properties, we could do both. So that would be the best thing, is to have blooming plants all the time, so that all the bees have enough to eat. But there is evidence that it does compete with our native bees.
Yeah, great, thank you. So does an 8x12 area, we know the answer to this, make a difference? We know it does. But if everybody in a garden club of 100 people planted natives, would that work? We know that it would. Would we all have to plant the same plant is really the question. Okay,
yeah, that's another good question, is how much of a particular species do you need? And that really depends on what that species is. A single oak tree get pretty big. You only need one of them to provide a lot of biomass out there. But a single rammet of milkweed is not going to be enough, even for a single monarch caterpillar. You need a milkweed patch. So it depends on what the plant is. the more the merrier is what you should go for. But a lot of people say, should I have a lot of different plants or fewer species that have more individuals? And I would say somewhere in between, in the middle there is what you want to go for. Diversity is good, but you do have to have a minimal amount, or it's going to become an ecological trap where you call in the insects and then there's not enough so they can complete their reproduction.
I would add that if everybody had an 8x12, that maybe everybody ought to have a shrub for bird cover and some wildflowers for butterflies and bees. And if they have a small tree, that would be great also. And so maybe, diversity in each one. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, if everybody has 8x12, but you got a lot of everybody's, add them up and you got a couple acres of good planting.
Yeah.
That's the value of getting your neighbor involved as well.
We got a lot of questions about mosquito spraying, Doug, of course. You answered it by saying that the spray is not too large, even though they'll tell you that the spray that they do won't hurt your insects. They will. But you have any suggestions, any things that have worked to help turn municipalities around? My fingers are crossed.
I can't give you any examples. What really happens is mosquitoes are annoying. We know that. And there are people who are very influential with the local governing body, and they complain. And to keep those people happy, they have the public display of the fogger go down the street. And that's what the complainer thinks is going to solve the problem. We need to make it better known that mosquito fogging is expensive and it's the worst alternative, even in terms of effectiveness. And that's why they've got to fog repeatedly. Mosquito fogging kills about 10% of the adult mosquito population. You need to kill 90% of the adult mosquito population if you're going to actually control mosquitoes. That's why controlling them in the larval stage is much more effective. But people can't see you doing that, so it's not a public display. Cheap, easy, and more effective. That it's just a matter of education. But I can't give you an example where it actually works. This is a countrywide epidemic of mosquito spraying that really started with Zika coming into Florida a couple of years ago. They started spraying in New York for Zika virus. It was never there, but they're spraying anyway. So to get them to stop, now it's a booming industry. Hard to turn that around.
I remember as a kid, running from the fogger man. Used to come around to our neighborhoods. That was a long time ago. So here's a really interesting question. Will caterpillars adapt to the non-native plants eventually? And if so, how long will it take?
Okay, we do have some data on that. Let me use the common reed Phragmites as an example. The genotype that's invasive in North America is from Europe, where it supports 170 species of insects. It has been in the East Coast here for almost 400 years. They used it as packing materials in the earliest ships. But it still only supports 5 insects after 400 years. And the 5 that it supports, actually, a couple of them are caterpillars. They were grass specialists to begin with, and they were able to move over to it. So it's not really adaptation. They simply were able to eat it when it got here. Adaptation happens, but it's very, very slow. So yes, more things will adapt to Phragmites, but in the meantime, it will, if you've ever seen it, and you have, I'm sure, it's a monoculture. All the other plants that used to be there are forced out. So we lose far more species than are adapting to Phragmites, and that's typical for our invasive plants. So yes, adaptation happens eventually. You'll know when Phragmites reach its potential when it gets 170 species here. We got a long way to go. So I don't know, 10,000 years, 100,000, who knows? It's not in our lifetime.
It's not native.
Yeah.
So where can we research what insects and birds should be in our area? I don't know where this question came from, so it's a countrywide question, Doug. Where do we research, and can you guide us with that?
There are a lot of insects in the country, 164,000 described insects in the US. And there's no one source that tells you where they are. So there's some good books for caterpillars, which I focus on because they're so important, food webs. But David Wagner's Caterpillars of Eastern North America, and he's working on Western North America now. Seabrook Lecky's moth book. Well, they've got little maps and they show you where they occur. Those are real good sources. The other insects, boy, I don't know.
Bugguide.net, but that's
Yeah,
not,
that, yeah.
but
Yeah,
that's not necessarily telling you what's native in your area and what ought to be there as opposed to an invader.
right. And all the species of moths are on the Moth Photographers Group website out of Mississippi, and there are little maps for those as well.
There are some native plant societies sprinkled throughout the state, throughout the country in different areas. And there also are probably, there's the North American Butterfly Association, and there might be local chapters. And so, Dr. Google probably has a lot of the answers for this. And
if you're looking for plant distributions, BONAP, BONAP, is a wonderful resource, and it gives you where every plant in the country occurs by county. So it's very, it's the best source that I know of.
Let me see. We live in very cold Laurentian mountain area of Quebec. Hello, Quebec.
Find a move.
Hello, Quebec. Oaks doesn't do well here. What's a good substitute?
Yeah, as you move farther north, oaks drop out, and then the conifers take over. I mean, yeah. Well, I don't know if you're in the plain states or not, but you get into the boreal forest, and it's the firs that take over and become the keystone plants. So you've got to go with what is growing in your natural areas. That's what's going to support the most species.
Now, does the National Wildlife Foundation website list trees? And I know that it doesn't say anything about them being keystone per se. So how would you choose the best trees using that website?
It doesn't use the word keystone. Well, we're actually revamping it. They're ranked. So it's the top of the list supports the most. They give you the numbers right there. So pick a plant with high numbers, and it's going to be keystone.
Pick a couple of them. Would you talk a little bit more about the Homegrown National Park map and how do people participate and et cetera, et cetera?
Well, you go to the website, and it's going to ask you where you live. So your address is very important. The object is to enter the data that will tell them how much land you are committing to, or you already have committed to, so that we can, the ultimate goal of the map is to reach this 20 million acre goal. That's, we say if we cut the area of lawn in half, we got 20 million acres. Of course, the real ultimate goal is get the whole country to do it, but we'll start with 20 million acres. So you put in your data, and we've gotten questions. Are you selling the data? No, we're not selling anything, and it doesn't cost you anything to do it. It's supposed to be a social media type of approach. The object for having this website to begin with is to get beyond the choir. I've been talking for at least 14 years to the choir, and it's fun talking to the choir, but we've got to reach that guy across the street who will never come to one of my talks. But there's a lot of people that love social media, and if they get into the, I'm gonna join, get on the map the way my other neighbor did, it might work, and it seems to be working. I mean, it's very young, but there's already 2,000 people that are on the map. So
can I add
on the map?
Can I add Pan's Garden to the map?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. My yard.
Of course.
Okay, so what's the best thing to prevent people from using pesticides? And really, the question is, because we know about that, is there anything such as organic alternatives? And should we use them?
Yes, there are. I mean, a lot of people want to replace herbicides with things like vinegar. Can vinegar kill you if you have too much of it? I don't know. We're talking about making something toxic enough to either kill a plant or kill an insect, and whether it's organic or not isn't going to make that much difference. It still is going to kill it. What I would love to see, not talking about the non-native plants, we do want to get rid of those, but is to increase our tolerance so that we don't want to kill everything. Yeah, neem oil is, I see it popping up there. That's a plant product that is an alternative that discourages things. You can wash aphids off of plants with soapy water. That's another alternative. You can walk around.
Or you can tolerate them until the beneficial insects show up to eat them.
You can tolerate them. You know, for invasive insects like Japanese beetle, get a bucket with warm soapy water in it and just hold it underneath and touch the flower or the leaves, they all drop in. I mean, mechanical control, that's organic too. But yeah, tolerance, I think, is the way to go.
Okay. Should I add a pond to my new flower garden? How important is a water feature?
A moving water feature turns out to be really attractive to birds. It's attractive to migrants because they're often very thirsty. It depends on where you live and how close you are to a natural source of water. But if you're in an area that doesn't have a stream or a river very nearby, it can be a very attractive source. A stagnant pond is not attractive. A lot of things will use it, but not particularly the birds. And that's why we call it a bubbler or a little dripper, where the water is circulating and gives a little sound. It makes it sound like the streams in Central America where these birds are overwintering. They really pulls them in. So you want to keep the water clear. They come in for a good drink. They love it.
One of our people said that they have a fountain with a bubbler, but it's not attracting birds. And so it makes me wonder, what are the plants around? Are there any trees or shrubs around so that a bird can feel safe to approach their bubbler? Birds need to feel safe. I know here in Pan's Garden, we have a Cooper's hawk that's happy to pounce on anything that gets out in the open.
Right. I mean, remember, water is just one of what the birds want. Wherever they are, they're eating constantly. They're looking for insects constantly. So if there are no insects in your yard, the birds aren't going to stay very long.
Okay, great. So somebody wants to know, are there natives that work in outdoor planters and window boxes? That's a Florida question. Yes, there are plenty that work in flower boxes and window boxes and flower pots. Come visit Pan's Garden and I'll walk you through and show you a bunch of them. Let's see what else we've got. This video will be available on the Preservation Foundation's YouTube page. So I don't know when that'll happen, but it will happen. Somebody asked a question about the oaks aren't listed on the National Wildlife Foundation website for Central Maryland. Is that?
That's a mistake. See, the data were transported from the USDA plant database, and which left Maryland out for some reason. We're still filling it in, but believe me, they're important in Maryland. Yeah. Look at Pennsylvania, and it'll be the same thing.
Okay, great. You have any opinion about this fungal disease that's used in last bite mosquito control traps? Are you familiar with it? It's called Into Care, and it's supposed to be harmless to non-target organisms. Well, that's probably
for adults. I have never heard of this.
Yeah, Into Care, INT letter number 2 care.
Okay. No, I don't know. I'll have to look it up.
Okay. Somebody uses standing fans on her porch to get rid of mosquitoes. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Are there certain species of oaks that are better hosts? I guess that depends on where you are, but you want to speak to that?
I'd love to speak to that, but we don't know at this point. If you look up what's eating oaks, it mostly says eats oaks and doesn't differentiate. But I do have a student right now who's looking at 16 different species of oaks. And so we will have answers for those. It does not include the live oak though, because we don't have them up here. Yeah. Oaks are separated in different groups. You've got the white oak group and the red oak group. There's a third group out west. I think the white oak group is going to come out a little bit on top of the red oak group, but all the oaks are good. At this point, I wouldn't worry about it. I would plant whatever oak is appropriate for where you are.
Right. Somebody asked about planting seashore paspalum as a native grass in tropical regions. Would it be okay to plant them in their Southwest Florida launch, or would they attract insects? You want to speak? Can you speak to that, or do you want me to say something about?
Well, there are a lot. There the skippers. Most of the skippers are grass specialists. Most of the satirids, the wood nymphs, are grass specialists. So there are a number of caterpillars that focus on grasses, but you also have the things that live in meadows. A lot of your meadow katydids and your grasshoppers and crickets. They're eating forbs as well, but grass is a very important resource. So yes, things will eat it, and it makes
the bird.
They make seeds that the birds use all winter long, right?
There you go. That's great. So let's see if there's anything else. How long have you lived in your house, by the way?
We're in their 20th year.
Okay.
But it didn't take 20 years for all those things I showed you to come.
Yep. Yep. In dealing with both native and invasive elm bark beetles, are there certain plants and other species of native trees that can be planted next to the elms that will help repel the bark beetles to help prevent Dutch elm? You know anything about that?
I doubt it. I doubt it. I can say though, Dutch elms was serious when we overplanted elms. They were the only
Yeah.
the only street trees, and so the disease was everywhere. All of the elms on my property, I started from seed that I got from surviving elms at the University of Delaware. It has been 20 years. I don't have any Dutch elm disease. They're 80 feet tall at this point, and maybe they will die eventually. But in the meantime, I've got great trees and they're healthy as anything. So it's not the problem that it used to be, at least where I live. I would plant elms and see what happens.
Okay, do it. So another important question, this is always running through the whole native plant community. Are cultivars, otherwise known as nativars, as good for wildlife as natives?
The answer is it depends. A cultivar is a genetic variant of the straight species, so it depends on what the genetic variant is. We did a study looking at 6 cultivar traits for plant habit, plant leaves, not involving the flowers, and this was all with woody plants. So just to make a long story short, changing a green leaf to red or purple was the only trait that consistently reduced insect use, because you're loading the leaves with anthocyanins, and that's a feeding deterrent. But most cultivars focus on flowers, and Annie White at the University of Vermont says the news isn't quite so good there, because it's very easy to mess up those specialized relationships with the specialist bees. Generalist bees are better. They can handle a lot of different things. But if you change the flower shape or color and it ends up reducing the amount of nectar, that's not going to be good. On the other hand, you could create a cultivar that produces more nectar if that was the goal, but it's always been about visuals. A lot of people love double flowers. That's taking the reproductive part of the flower and turning it into petals. So that makes no flower or no pollen and nectar. So with flowers, more often than not, but not always, it reduces its effectiveness for pollinators. I would love to see nurseries carry the straight species along with the cultivars so that you have a choice, so that if you want to go straight species, it's available to you.
Now, what about, however, the cross-pollination of straight species and cultivars? For me, I'd rather know cultivars. Get over it. For me, that's egocentricity trying to win over ecocentricity. And
yeah, I like that. I think you told me that last time. I love that.
I did tell you that last time, and it's in chapter 6 of your book, by the way.
Oh, good. I still love it.
Yeah. So let's see what else. Anything else here that I missed? Somebody asked about, are your students available for helping in a landscape plan project in a grove of trees north of Baltimore?
My students, I'm in the Department of Entomology. I'm not in landscape design, but the University of Delaware does have a landscape design department and landscape architect undergraduate degree. Maybe some of those students would be available, but I was told by a landscape designer years ago to not talk about designs because I don't know what I'm talking about. I can tell you what your landscape should accomplish, but there's no one design that will enable you to do that. And there really are, landscape design it's art. And it's not what I do. It's not what my students do. We do the ecology end of it. But we need to expand the empty niche right now that I call ecological landscaping or ecological gardening. Most people don't garden at all. They just want to hire somebody. And, I want more people to hang out their shingles so that you can just hire those people.
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
It's not going to be my students, unfortunately.
Here's a question that speaks to an interesting issue. The question is, how big does a pawpaw tree have to be to have caterpillars appear on them, part one. Part two, will they defoliate the tree and kill it?
Part two, no. Defoliation almost never happens. And if it does, it's typically with a non-native insect like the gypsy moth or the winter moth that doesn't have any natural controls. The zebra swallowtail on pawpaw, you know what? You're not going to see the larvae on there, even if you have it, because they are nocturnal. It wasn't until somebody told me that, and I went out at 5 a.m. in the morning before the caterpillars had crawled down right to the base of the tree where nobody ever looks. You could see where they had fed that day, but I never found them. And as soon as I went out early, very early in the morning, I found that they were there. But to find one or two is a special thing. Don't worry about defoliation, particularly pawpaws, because other than the zebra swallowtail, not that much eats it.
Yeah, great. So here's a nice, I think, closing question. I'm going to just read it. It would be wonderful if you could make a video like this that could be put on every willing city's website so people could discover and watch this, and maybe you could influence so many more people over a long period. This is a hard sell to ordinary citizens by individuals like us, but you are so well informed and so well spoken that this person would promote your video to everyone that they know. So, there.
A lot of people have taped these talks over the years, and many of them are on YouTube, believe it or not.
So, on YouTube.
So you just have to convince your city people to put it on their website. Yeah, I'm not opposed. Do it.
Great. So that's the last question at the moment, and we're going to close up. I just want to thank you, Doug, again, and thank you, Susanna again, for making this event possible. Thanks all for who attended. I had 202 at the high point. I might have missed a couple. If you are Palm Beach locals and you would like to learn more about the Phipps Ocean Park project, please attend the next community feedback session on February 19th. You can check the Preservation Foundation's website for under events for the listing of that. And also come and visit me at Pan's Garden, some of you. You're asking great questions, and I can help you with some of those things. The garden is open every day from 10 to 4. I'm here on weekdays. I'll give you some excellent native plant resources and answer any further questions you might have. And when you are here, you should visit our exhibition of native botanical art in collaboration with the American Society of Botanical Artists, weekdays from 10 to 5, now through April 30th in the Foundation's headquarters. Some of the beautiful paintings are right behind me. You really have to see them. They're really quite spectacular, and they're for sale. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, you two beautiful people, for being here this afternoon.
You're welcome. It's always fun.
Yep. So
well, thank you very much. And as usual, I totally enjoy being together with Doug Tallamy, even if it's on Zoom. And I just have one question, and that's always part of what I'm thinking about. Because when these birds have traveled 300 miles and they land, they need water, they need food, they need a place to rest. And I'm very much involved in everywhere I go to make safe places for the birds to have water. And I understand that for insects, we need mud. Is that right, Doug?
Well, the aquatic insects, many of them will live in the organic part of your wetlands. Yeah, you're talking about, so if you have a crystal clear pool, that won't make a lot of insects.
No, not the insect. They like mud and they like off the leaves, and I noticed that. But for the birds, I find it very important to have a safe place where they can, and I love when they come in the evening and the little birds goes in first and the bigger birds goes, oh yeah, that looks safe, and then they come and get them away and so on. And there's this whole hen-pecking order. It's so wonderful to have that in your garden. So you could just sit there and watch the birds take their evening bath and the evening drink. Of course, it is a lot of work with fresh water morning and night.
It's worth it.
It is.
Right.
It's worth it. And Doug, is there any website or mailing list where you'll be appearing in person once COVID is over, and online in the meantime? Check your website. Is that?
Everything has been online since March, and we're just not doing in-person stuff until we can. So no, I don't have anything in person on the calendar. Well, some people are scheduling for 2022, but for this year, we'll see. We're hoping for the fall, but not yet.
Yeah, great. All right, everybody. Have a good,
Hey,
safe
take
evening.
care. Good to see you, Susanna. Good to see you, Susan.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, Susan. You did a fantastic job.
Thanks, dear. See you
We'll
soon.
see you later.
Thanks for making it possible.